Hello, everyone. Thank you, Session Chair. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity to share my research about adaptive governance in peri-urban Chennai here in this session. This is the outline of my talk. I shall start with a brief background of the Peri-Scene research project, followed by an introduction of Chennai's peri-urban region and the nexus to disaster and climate change risks, before giving an overview of the adaptive governance framework that was developed. From an overview of the existing governance features, I will outline some of the entry points for adaptive governance and related pathways, to finish with a few concluding remarks. The Peri-Scene research project is an international collaboration of UK, Swedish, and Indian partners and funders. It conceptualizes peri-urbanization as a version of the Anthropocene, which is essentially a new kind of global human environment system shaped by peri-urbanization. The foremost goal of the Peri-Scene project is a global assessment of the peri-urban and its climate change risks and adaptation challenges. Two in-depth case studies focus on the Chennai region, India, and the Manchester region in the UK. Each has a very different history, development pressures, socio-economic trends, and climate risks. A comprehensive policy lab was also conducted online with researchers at 18 peri-urban sites globally. This is a space for diagnosis and mapping of problems and design of responses and adaptive pathways. Chennai, until recently, 1996, known as Madras as well, in southeast India, is a sprawling city along the Bay of Bengal's Coromandel coast in Tamil Nadu, characterized by subtropical climate. The urban agglomeration grew rapidly with an estimated population of 8.6 million in 2011, compared to 3.5 million in 1971. A diverse economic base feeds into the city's gross domestic product of 58 billion US dollars, including information technology, automobile and hardware manufacturing, healthcare, and financial services. However, it also contains the country's unemployment, pollution, social deprivation, and haphazard urbanization. As can be seen from the animated maps, Chennai's growth story as an industrial hub and fourth largest metropolitan agglomeration in India during the last few decades has also led to significant urbanization, drastically altering a complex land and waterscape, simultaneously making it vulnerable to multiple climate risks, as evidenced recently by the floods in 2015. This was followed by a period of acute water scarcity in 2019, leaving the city to fluctuate between water abundance and scarcity, a condition that is expected to get worse. For centuries, though, Chennai's hinterland ecology of natural and constructed water bodies has contributed to managing these types of risks that were inherent to its climatic landscape. As the city expands and urbanizes into these hinterlands, our core question posed is, can the city develop adaptive pathways to address the twin challenges posed by rapid peri-urbanization and climate risk? So where is Chennai's peri-urban region? We answered this question based on previous research in the Chennai region that highlighted the interdependence of human settlements, livelihoods, and water resources by applying a bioregional approach to identify the regional limits. Consequently, the Chennai region is defined based on the watershed area of 4 river basins, marked in blue. Further, we distinguish 4 functional zones within this bioregion, but outside the core city, which is delineated by the administrative boundaries of the Greater Chennai Corporation. This is the very light red line here on the map. So these 4 delineated areas are, firstly, the IT corridor stretching southward along the coast and immediate hinterland. Second, the Ennore region in the north with large-scale infrastructures like power plants and ports. Then the third, industrial corridor towards west and southwest along the Bangalore Highway. And fourth, the hinterland encompassing a large watershed region overlapping 3 states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. For methodological analytical reasons, this approach resulted in the identification of 3 scales. Firstly, the macro and bioregional scale. Secondly, the meso or landscape scale. And thirdly, the micro or community neighborhood scale, where the themes of urbanization and climate change converge and entangle, creating both challenges and opportunities. Essentially, these scales play a role in teasing out how various actors and stakeholders interact with each other and how they work within different governance arrangements at each scale. The Parisine has used global mapping systems and local consultations to address the question, where is the peri-urban? This is especially complex in a dynamically urbanizing context, such as the Chennai region with its many satellite towns. Extended suburbs, urban green spaces, water bodies, and semi-rural hinterland with its rapidly changing population and evolving built environment indicators. Overall, a relatively simple definition of the peri-urban based primarily on population data is shown in the map. According to these data, the lower and higher density peri-urban settlements and hinterland, see numbers D and E, which together make up approximately 3.5% of the total population, but 40% of the land area, combined an extraordinary population growth rate of about 140% between 1990 and 2015. Whereas in contrast, the urban-suburban, see numbers A and B, with more than 90% population and 50% land area, saw a population increase of slightly more than 50% only. In summary, while the most dynamic demographic change is taking place in the lower and higher density peri-urban, the largest absolute population increase is still occurring in the urban edge and fringe areas of Chennai. The Chennai metropolitan region is one amongst the largest urban agglomerations in India and at the same time highly vulnerable to climate change. Topographically, Chennai is located on the highly exposed southeast coast of India on relatively low and flat coastal land, the low elevation coastal zone. 3 major rivers, the Adyar, Coombe, and Kosastalaya, frequently inundate following even short periods of rain. Almost all extreme weather events in Chennai, flooding, droughts, cyclones, oscillate around water. Chennai city reports recurrent flooding for the years 2006, 7, 8, 10, 2015, and 2021 due to single-day extreme rainfall. The coastal area of about 27.79 square kilometers is classified as highly vulnerable for erosion and sea level rise, with the most severe scenario of sea level rise being projected of about approximately 78 centimeters by 2100. The Climate Change Vulnerability Index of 2021 ranks Chennai the highest among large Indian cities in terms of exposure to climate change-related threats. Moreover, one study finds that Chennai is ranked the most socioeconomically vulnerable to climate change among the metropolitan cities in India. The risk of flooding in Chennai is expected to worsen with climate change, while higher temperatures and more frequent droughts are expected to exacerbate water scarcity in the city. Adaptive governance has become a term for addressing and dealing with wicked problems, such as climate change and other global polycrises, of socioeconomic nature that render our future uncertain. It appears to be particularly suited for recognizing and acknowledging the intertwined complexities of socio-ecological systems. Based on a review of literature on empirical studies of flood governance in peri-urban areas, our colleagues developed the ELSA framework of adaptive governance: engage, learn, situate, act, to clarify 4 key principles and to provide a general tool to assess the adaptive governance characteristics in a particular place. For the specific context in Chennai case study, we apply a perspective of adaptive governance that is A, multidimensional by deploying this adaptive governance framework, B, multi-level considering local, intermediate, and state governance levels, and C, multi-scalar, applying the peri-scene approach of the bioregional, macro, landscape, medium, and community neighborhood local scales. Now, some salient features of governance in Chennai. A recent in-depth study on Chennai's metro governance by the Chennai Resilience Center in 2019 reveals the current state and challenges of metropolitan governance in Chennai, characterizing it as polycentric, multi-level at local, state, and national levels, multi-type, nested, overlapping, and fragmented jurisdictions are characteristic here, multi-sectoral, comprising of various public and private organizations, civil society, and others, and E, multifunctional, with units performing specific functions. Now I would like to show some exemplary overview of government administration in the metropolitan region as we found them. So the plethora of government agencies and jurisdictions, including parastatals, poses a conundrum of inefficiency and often uncoordinated decision-making, frequently resulting in exacerbating or even generating additional disaster and climate risks. Notable is the existence of the strong administrative, decentralized, yet not devolved structure of the state, with roots in the British top-down controlled colonial government, contrasting with the elected democratic system of multi-level, constitutionally devolved roles of the rural and urban local bodies. Focusing on the administrative setup, this diagram here exemplifies various overlapping boundaries of the Chennai metropolitan area, the CMA, which represents at the same time the Chennai metropolitan development area. The districts, as an element of the decentralized state administration, cut across the boundary of the Greater Chennai Corporation, which is not shown here. But this is the local urban body with an elected assembly, which is smaller though than the CMA area. So here we have the districts in green and in yellow. And this is the Chennai district, while the actual boundary of the Greater Chennai City Corporation is somewhere here. So, and the planning area is larger, which is this area here. In addition to these various levels of administration, a multitude of planning and infrastructure-related agencies are mandated to operate across these levels outside the mandates of rural and urban local bodies. The latter are rather one amongst many players than fully fledged self-governing local bodies, sitting under continuous control by the state government. So the same time, the districts reach also further into the hinterland, as is visible here. This is Kanchipuram district, the green part, while this here is one of our peri-urban case study areas. Now we come to the identification and how we characterize entry points for adaptive governance. For analytical rather than practical reasons, we characterize two dimensions of entry points for adaptive innovation. In reality, though, these two are related and often interdependent. The first one are thematic entry points, for example, traditional water management or peri-urban agroecology, ecotourism as some possible adaptive pathways. Secondly, there are also institutional entry points, such as windows of opportunity and niche innovations in formal and informal practices and institutional structures. For instance, in the organizational setup or relationships of agents and stakeholders, or even the legal framework. There are a number of recent examples of governance impulses in Chennai that were induced either through policies or calamities that occurred. In all these cases, institutional changes either happened in a prescribed manner, incorporating or changing statutory status of local rural urban bodies, like for the enlargement of the planning region, or establishing entirely new institutions, such as a state disaster management authority, as per national law, or in a conventional fashion, such as the establishment of the special purpose vehicle for the implementation of the Chennai Smart City project. Bold experimentation to facilitate innovative procedures, mutual learning, and co-creative knowledge production through participatory, more equal and empowering participation of stakeholders remains largely absent. Clearly, the undercurrent of planning and implementation processes is still adhering to an instrumental, result and output-focused bureaucratic approach than a process-oriented multi-stakeholder notion. In contrast, the area with the potentially widest scope for institutional reform, the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, has received only partial support from state governments across India. In spite of this, we argue that peri-urban areas within the Chennai region are also providers of climate change adaptation functions. These will become particularly significant in the coming decades as the climate continues to change and extreme weather events are expected to become more frequent and intense. A notable example relates to opportunities of building on traditional water tank management for the implementation of the conservation and maintenance of water bodies. These have seen significant changes in their management from locally decentralized to state level, more centralized infrastructures, and governance over the course of a century. However, this raises significant governance challenges that remain either unaddressed or at best in the proposal stage, like the Chennai Metro Flood Management Committee. Appropriate governance frameworks are needed, encompassing the wide range of sectors and stakeholder groups interested in the future of these areas. However, emerging good practices can also be found. Thus, there exist some examples of formalized organizations that play an active role in informal partnerships. For example, Meenava Sangam, the fishermen collectives, and local water users associations. Or formal governance partnerships, which bring together different levels and units of government, like the Chennai River Water Restoration Trust. Now, let's have a look at potential adaptive pathways at multiple scales. Taking clues from these instances and our analytical research findings on the situated conditions of peri-urbanization and the climate change risks identified for Chennai, we mapped potentials and requirements of adaptive governance and related adaptive future pathways. These are summarized in this diagram around the four core interfaces of the peri-urban: climate, society, and governance at two levels. Firstly, at the top, a strategic meta level of sorts, defining four themes of first, peri-urban development syndromes relating to sprawl, extraction, or waste. Second, socio-climatic syndromes relating to controversy and division. Third, socioeconomic syndromes relating to inequality and exclusion. And four, governance syndromes relating to being defunded, captured, and fragmented. Secondly, at a more topically specific level, syndromes and impacts describe specific issues, such as divisive inequalities due to private residential enclaves, impact on land and ecosystems, or market governance open to corruption and elite capture. Figure at the top. Flipped around, in green, positive potential synergies and pathways were constructed, again at a more strategic meta level, as well a topic-specific level of thematic synergies and pathways. At the strategic level, the four identified pathways are: number one, synergistic peri-urban development and market transformation. Number two, synergistic socio-climatic consensus and capacity. Three, synergistic peri-urban economic, social development and resilience. And four, synergistic governance and institutional development. Within this topic-specific synergies and pathways, water, flood, and drought-related pathways are the most crucial, being of high priority. In our research, we briefly outlined four such specific synergies and pathways that we identified based on the multi-scalar notion of intervention. The first one relates to social eco-innovation and micro-governance in a deprived community in a village within an industrial peri-urban setting. That's the neighborhood scale. The second is an ecotourism pathway on the southern peri-urban fringe, characterized by rapid changes in the waterscape and people's livelihoods at landscape scale. The third, an agroecology pathway for food sovereign spaces at the bioregional scale. And the fourth one, as well at bioregional scale, a water management pathway. We have been actively involved in incubating activities and supporting existing initiatives and trends through an action research approach. For example, with regards to the agroecology pathway, urban and peri-urban Chennai has seen tremendous rise in urban gardening initiatives and peri-urban organic farming coming out of civil society over the past 15 years. For a more strategic approach, it will be important to communicate the co-benefits of an agroecological pathway for the entire metro region to all stakeholders, especially government agencies. The timing seems opportune, as currently the revision of the existing master plan is going on to formulate a new one for 2026 to 2035. Recently, we held an interactive workshop with stakeholders to explore potentials and opportunities to incubate an agroecology network or platform for the region that could collaborate towards an agro-food systems transformation. So I conclude here. So this paper focused on the identification of possible entry points for generating an adaptive governance approach for sustainable climate change responsive future development pathways for peri-urban Chennai. We found, while there are many promising activities happening, they are scattered and often disconnected in a rather fledgling state, and these impulses are mostly discernible in the civil society sector. In contrast, it is apparent that a key challenge in Chennai remains the transition from a predominantly top-down, strongly hierarchical, government-led and dominated type of governance to a more experimentally guided, co-creative and co-productive type of collaborative governance, which allows for climate change adaptation within a longer-term perspective of transformative future development pathways. The implications of our research and ongoing dynamic changes hence highlight that sooner or later the Parisine adaptive pathways and recommendations will have to challenge in some way the existing system, which has produced such problems and enables them to continue and reproduce. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there is any further interest, you may want to watch our documentary film, which is available here on this link.